When you think of Paul McCartney, images of a cheerful, charming, and iconic musician often come to mind, someone whose music has inspired millions, and whose personality seems warm and approachable. But behind the public persona lies a side of Paul that few have ever seen, a side filled with deep frustration, anger, and, yes, even hatred toward one individual more than anyone else in his life. For decades, McCartney maintained a calm, diplomatic image, even during tense moments with his legendary bandmates. Yet recent revelations have shed light on a hidden story of personal conflict, creative disagreements, and emotional strain that went far beyond the occasional clash over music or management. This wasn't a fleeting annoyance or a minor quarrel. This was a profound, simmering resentment that shaped Paul's interactions, decisions, and even the creative output of his career. Insiders reveal that the source of Paul's hatred was someone he had once trusted, a figure whose actions, words, or choices pushed him to the edge over and over again. The resentment grew quietly at first, beneath the surface, carefully masked by polite smiles and professional courtesy. But as time passed, it became impossible to ignore. This tension, built over years, eventually erupted in ways that shocked those closest to him. The story offers a rare glimpse into the human side of a musical legend. It shows that even icons with a global fan base and a seemingly perfect life can experience raw, intense emotions, and that the pressures of fame, creativity, and personal relationships can sometimes lead to extraordinary conflict. Fans will be stunned as the layers of betrayal, rivalry, and heartbreak are revealed, and as the reality behind the music and behind Paul McCartney himself finally comes to light. This is a story of ambition, emotion, and the complex relationships that exist behind the scenes of some of the greatest music in history. Few stories in music history are as iconic as that of the Beatles. The band not only revolutionized popular music, but also became a global phenomenon, leaving an indelible mark on generations of fans. Yet beneath the laughter, camaraderie, and world-changing performances, tensions sometimes simmered, tensions that the public rarely saw. Among these, one rift stands out: the personal and professional conflict that led Paul McCartney to harbor deep resentment toward a specific individual more than anyone else in his life. The origins of this tension trace back to the peak of the Beatles' fame. During a period when creative differences were beginning to surface, Paul, known for his meticulous approach to songwriting and production, often found himself at odds with certain collaborators or bandmates who challenged his vision. While disagreements were normal in any creative environment, this particular individual repeatedly crossed lines that Paul considered sacred, lines involving trust, respect, and shared artistic goals. Insiders recall moments when Paul would retreat into silence after a confrontation, his mind visibly racing as he tried to process the perceived betrayals. Those close to him noticed that what started as irritation slowly grew into genuine anger. This was no passing annoyance. It was a simmering frustration that affected his mood, his work, and his interactions both on and off the stage. Compounding the situation was the pressure of constant public scrutiny. Every decision, every argument, and every misstep was magnified by fans and media alike. Paul's perfectionist tendencies meant that he internalized much of this stress, and the resulting tension with this individual became even more pronounced. Friends recall that he would often spend long hours in private reflection, trying to reconcile his personal feelings with the professional demands of being a Beatle. By the mid-1970s, the rift had reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. Paul's frustration, once contained behind polite smiles and professional courtesy, began to surface in subtle ways in meetings, in studio sessions, and even in public statements. Those who witnessed these moments describe a side of Paul rarely seen, one that is passionate, unyielding, and unafraid to confront conflict head-on when it finally became unavoidable. This chapter marks the beginning of a story that is as much about human emotion as it is about music. It is the tale of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal, showing that even those who seem larger than life are not immune to the complexities of personal relationships. The stage was set for a confrontation that would leave a lasting mark on Paul McCartney and on the history of modern music itself. As the Beatles' fame grew, So did the pressures of creative collaboration, media attention, and personal relationships. What began as subtle disagreements between Paul McCartney and this individual soon escalated into full-blown tension, straining both their professional work and personal interactions. Friends and insiders recall that Paul, normally the image of charm and diplomacy, began showing signs of visible frustration that few had witnessed before. The conflicts often arose during studio sessions. Paul, known for his meticulous approach to music and production, would spend hours perfecting arrangements, experimenting with harmonies, or fine-tuning lyrics. Yet this particular individual frequently clashed with him, challenging decisions, interrupting ideas, or dismissing suggestions that Paul felt were integral to the music's success. What might have seemed like typical creative differences to outsiders was, for Paul, a breach of trust and emotional line that should not have been crossed as disagreements accumulated. The resentment grew. Friends describe Paul retreating into long periods of contemplation, wrestling with anger and disappointment. He wasn't just annoyed, one insider revealed. This was deeper. It was personal. He felt betrayed in ways that cut to the core of who he was, both as a musician and as a person. The intensity of his feelings made it difficult for him to compartmentalize the conflict, and it began to affect even his interactions with other band members outside the studio. The tension had ripple effects on tours, interviews, and public appearances. While Paul maintained a professional front for the sake of the band and their millions of fans, those closest to him could sense the underlying strain. Private conversations revealed his simmering anger and, at times, moments of despair. He feared that unresolved issues could damage not only the music, but also his reputation, legacy, and emotional well-being. Adding to the complexity was the constant scrutiny of the media. Rumors, gossip, and speculation about the band's internal dynamics only intensified Paul's frustration. He often felt misunderstood and misrepresented, amplifying his resentment toward the individual who had become the focal point of his anger. Behind closed doors, Paul's emotions were raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal, a stark contrast to the calm and cheerful persona the public adored. This escalation of tension marked a pivotal turning point in Paul McCartney's story. What had started as creative disagreement became something more profound, a personal vendetta fueled by perceived betrayal, emotional strain, and the pressures of life under the spotlight. For Paul, this conflict was not just about music, it was about respect, trust, and the boundaries that define human relationships. By the end of this chapter, it becomes clear that even icons like Paul McCartney are vulnerable to human emotion. Ambition, passion, and talent can coexist with anger, hurt, and frustration, creating a complicated web of feelings that can impact even the most celebrated lives. The stage was set for confrontation, reflection, and decisions that would leave a lasting mark on both his personal life and his legendary career. As the years progressed, the tension between Paul McCartney and this individual reached a breaking point. What had once been manageable disagreements had grown into deep-seated resentment, affecting not only their working relationship but Paul's emotional well-being. Friends and insiders recall that even Paul, known for his composure and charm, found it increasingly difficult to hide his true feelings. The breaking point occurred during a particularly intense recording session. Paul had spent hours perfecting a track, meticulously layering harmonies and refining arrangements. But this individual openly challenged his decisions, dismissing his ideas and questioning his authority in front of the studio team. For Paul, this was the culmination of years of mounting frustration, a moment where patience gave way to unfiltered emotion. After the session, Paul withdrew, reflecting on the depth of his anger and disappointment. Those close to him described his mood as somber, tinged with a mixture of sadness and irritation. He had long tolerated behavior that undermined his vision and effort, but now it had become intolerable. The betrayal he felt was not just professional, it was deeply personal. The emotional toll was significant. Paul, who had always valued harmony, both musically and personally, struggled with the realization that reconciliation might not be possible. The individual who had once been trusted implicitly had, over time, become the source of some of Paul's most intense negative emotions. This awareness weighed heavily on him, creating sleepless nights and moments of quiet reflection as he grappled with feelings of anger, betrayal, and disappointment. Insiders reveal that Paul began taking deliberate steps to protect his emotional and creative well-being. He limited interactions with the individual, focused on personal projects, and leaned on close friends and family for support. While maintaining professionalism in public, he privately confronted the reality that some relationships, no matter how long-standing, could not be repaired without significant compromise. This breaking point also marked a turning moment in Paul's personal growth. While the experience was painful, it forced him to set boundaries, prioritize his own well-being, and confront emotions he had long suppressed. He began to understand that harboring resentment, though difficult, could also be channeled into creative energy, fueling some of the music and projects that followed. Ultimately, the breaking point reveals the human side of a legend. Paul McCartney, adored worldwide for his music and charm, is not immune to intense emotion, conflict, or personal struggle. This chapter serves as a reminder that behind every icon is a human being navigating complex relationships, emotional challenges, and the pressure of life in the spotlight. By facing this difficult reality, Paul demonstrated resilience, introspection, and a willingness to protect both his heart and his art lessons that resonate far beyond the music industry. After years of tension and unspoken grievances, Paul McCartney finally reached a point of reflection and understanding. While the feelings of anger and betrayal toward this individual had been intense, Paul realized that holding onto resentment indefinitely would only harm him emotionally, creatively, and personally. This chapter of his life became one of resolution, self-awareness, and the quiet power of perspective. Following the breaking point, Paul took deliberate steps to create boundaries that protected his well-being. He focused on his music, personal projects, and relationships with those who offered genuine support. By redirecting his energy toward creativity and meaningful connections, he found a renewed sense of purpose. Long walks, quiet studio sessions, and time with close family became essential practices for maintaining his emotional balance. Paul also reflected deeply on the nature of the conflict. He recognized that while the actions of the individual had provoked strong emotions, holding onto hatred indefinitely would not change the past. Instead, he sought to understand the circumstances, motivations, and pressures that had contributed to the strain. By reframing the situation, Paul was able to transform anger into insight, learning valuable lessons about communication, boundaries, and the limits of trust. The process of reflection was not easy. There were moments of frustration, grief, and lingering disappointment. Yet Paul's resilience, honed over decades of life in the public eye, helped him navigate these emotional challenges with grace. He learned to accept that some relationships, no matter how important they once were, cannot always be repaired fully, and that letting go does not mean forgetting. It means prioritizing one's own peace and creative freedom. This period of resolution also highlighted Paul's growth as a person and as an artist. Freed from the constant strain of unresolved conflict, he was able to channel his experiences into his music, infusing songs with emotion, depth, and authenticity. Friends and collaborators noticed a renewed energy in his work, a balance between vulnerability and strength that made his later projects some of his most memorable. Finally, Paul McCartney's journey with this conflict stands as a testament to the complexity of human relationships. Even one of the world's most celebrated musicians, known for charm and optimism, experienced deep emotional struggle. Yet, through reflection, boundary setting, and resilience, he found a way to move forward without bitterness, with insight, and with his creative spirit intact. This chapter reminds fans and observers alike that the human heart is capable of both intense emotion and profound healing. For Paul, the story of conflict, anger, and eventual resolution is not only a personal journey, but a lesson for the world. That understanding, self-awareness, and the courage to let go can transform even the most painful experiences into opportunities for growth, creativity, and lasting peace.